Good evening, good morning, whatever time it is that you're joining us here on Speaking by Faith. I know it's been a while since we have recorded or anything. It's been busy, a busy Christmas season. Happy New Year. I hope everybody is having a great one. And me, as you can see, me and Stephen, we are still at it, going through the book of John. Stephen, you have anything to say before we really get started going into the text?
Nope.
Nothing to go. All right, basically, we're not changing things up. We're still the same two guys just doing a normal little verse by verse Bible study. The last time we talked and recorded, we was in John chapter 3, and we just had went through the new birth. Jesus talking to Nicodemus, and that new birth was supposed to be born of water and the Spirit. And we learned it was, if you wasn't born of water and the Spirit, you could not enter the kingdom, His church. And so this, is really pointing towards the importance of how essential water baptism is. It's essential to the plan of God's plan of salvation, not man's plan of salvation, not Alex, not Stephen. It is God's plan, and it's just part of it. And it's just a work of God. It's something that we have authority to do. It's not a work of merit, and it's not a work of the law. It's just a work of righteousness. So anyway, we finished that talk up, and we're going to pick up in verse 9 of John chapter 3. And I do believe we're going to try to get down to verse, probably I would say around 15, I would assume. But anyways, I'm still reading. What's that?
Let's go for it.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm still reading from the New King James Version. And let's hope still there. All right, here we go. Nicodemus answered and said to him, "How can these things be?" Jesus answered and said to him, "Are you the teacher of Israel and do not know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak that we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I have told you of earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." I went ahead and done verse 16 because I know it kind of fits in there contextually.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I figured, and that's another thing. I do believe this chapter is really got a lot of meat to it. You can really get digging deep into this chapter 3. It's got a whole lot of good stuff in here, in my opinion. I think it's probably one of the deepest ones we've had so far.
Sure, yeah.
Got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's a real good one.
It is. All right. Verse 9 says, Nicodemus answered and said to him, "How can these things be?" Some of the commentaries I've been reading. I've been reading I've been back to Guy in the Woods a little bit past week, reading some of his stuff, and Milligan, and my other one. But the main thing I've seen that they said here is that some say that through Nicodemus' response, you can kind of see him as he's been humbled a little bit. Now he's inquiring more knowledge or more. He wants more information, but he's been humbled. And why he's been humbled is because he's a Pharisee, right? What Jesus is speaking to him is kind of different teaching. It's strange to him because him, a Pharisee, or a separatist is what they would, what it really means. I believe that word Pharisee is separated. They've been separated. And I think that's a definition that they gave themselves, honestly. But anyways, so him and his Pharisee brothers, they thought of themselves as the favored ones of Israel, and they thought that they should already be in the kingdom. We're in the kingdom already. That's what they thought. They thought through their fleshly birth from their mother had automatically give them possession of the spiritual blessings that God was going to offer everyone. They thought they had an honored place, but here's Jesus, this man from Nazareth, this carpenter, telling them no. Unless he's giving them, he's bringing all this new information to them, and they really don't like it, and they don't understand it. And so it's as if here, how can these things be? He's he's been humbled, but yet he's still confused. And again, he went to Jesus for answers. He's still staying with Jesus for answers. He wants to know the truth. You got anything there, Mr. Stephen?
He was stuck. The question reveals he was stuck in an intellectual and philosophical quagmire of the flesh or earthly realities. He couldn't figure out how to re-enter the mother's womb, so he doesn't realize it's a spiritual birth that Christ is talking about. He thinks it's just how can you do it? I don't understand how that happens. So
yeah. And I think that's still that's a problem today. A lot of people try to take this back to the birth of your when we was born, physically born here, and it's like no. I mean Jesus. No, even Nicodemus understood that. That it wasn't that, but we do need to realize it is a spiritual birth, but it happens here on the physical earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I had somebody tell me, how can that be? And I said, well, if you know that Jesus built his kingdom, yes, that's all right. Well, where's his kingdom? Well, it's a spiritual thing. Well, aren't Christians part of that kingdom? Yeah. I said, well, are we in heaven? Are we on here on earth? Spiritual things can happen here, but just because it's spiritual doesn't mean that just because it's something spiritual doesn't mean that it can't happen here in our physical world. And I told him, how are we supposed to worship? You're supposed to worship in spirit and in truth. I mean, it's that spiritual birth can happen here on our physical realm. But yeah, poor Nicodemus, he's stuck between a rock and a hard spot,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I know it's kind of a little off subject. I think we've talked about it before, that the show, The Chosen.
Mm-hmm.
Have you watched any of it?
A little bit, maybe first episode 2.
I've watched the first 3 seasons, and I really like how they portray Nicodemus. It's really sad. They show him; he's just on the fence. It's a really good show. I really enjoyed it, and I like how they portrayed Nicodemus after this talk here. It's sad, but it's heartbreaking. It's a good performance of that show. I will say that. I would recommend it. It's something good to watch. Verse 10. I'm going to quit rambling. Jesus answered and said to him, are you the teacher of Israel and do not know these things? I love sometimes when we read certain scriptures and it's Jesus talking specifically, you can kind of pick up on his him kind of being a little aggravated, or him being rebuking, or like he's like having just. It's no different when he's talking to his apostles. He's like, man, we just went over these things, and you still don't understand. Or which of the apostles were talking about seeing God, and Jesus is like, have I not been with you this whole time? And you're asking how can one see God? I mean, so we kind of see here, are you a teacher of Israel and do not know these things? We kind of hear Jesus giving Nicodemus maybe, or rebuking him a little bit, kind of. Would chastise be a good word?
I think he's trying to teach him. I think he's trying, and I'm gonna bring this up whenever maybe verse 11 here, that he's gonna actually use very similar words that Nicodemus is using try to figure out his own answers, and Christ is going to say, well, you know this thing, or can a man enter? And then Christ is going to use his own words to try to help him, kind of guide him. It's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm really hoping you got a whole lot for verse 11, because let's go ahead and get in verse 11 then. Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak that we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. I'm going to put in verse 12 here because I'm pretty sure it's going to go in all together. If I told you earthly things and you do not believe, how would you believe if I tell you heavenly things? And so the reason I said I hope you got I hope you're able to clean up my mess here. There's a big thing here apparently in all three of the commentaries I've read with the use of singular and plural here with the word you and we.
Okay.
It says singular you to the plural we. So he says speaking directly to Nicodemus. Jesus is now speaking. So first he's speaking directly to Nicodemus, and then he kind of changed it. Now he's speaking to the Jewish nation at large. It's almost somebody, I forget which commentary, is almost as if now there's more people there. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know. It says, and then at the end of it, he starts including himself. Jesus is including himself with all those who did know and who should receive his teachings. And it's basically, I kind of got lost, and with all this, I get lost sometimes in the grammar and how I told you many times before, I'm not a very smart person. But anyways, Jesus, I think you're going to have to clean it up. But at the end of and NIV reads it better at the end.
Okay.
Because NIV says you people, so that's where one of the commentaries I read says almost as if maybe there's more people there now. I'm not really sure. Mm-hmm. And then on the earthly things and heavenly things, it's basically, Jesus is telling them, if you can't understand this earthly thing that's going to be done here, this new birth, even though the birth is from above, it takes place here on earth. Nicodemus, how are you going to, if you can't accept these simple things that I'm telling you, how are you going to accept these heavenly things or understand these heavenly teachings such as the spiritual kingdom, eternal life, his divine nature and such? So there's a lot going on here in these two verses, and I hope you're able to clean that up a little bit.
In verses 11 and 12?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But don't know. We'll see. I do want to say this, though, because I found this. I thought it was really good to share. And so between verses 2 to verse 12, there's 7 kind of interchanges that goes on. So, like, for example, in verse 2, where Nicodemus declares, we know about Jesus. You are a man from God, or, the rabbi and those things. In verse 11, Jesus says, that which we know we speak. Nicodemus said, thou art a teacher, verse 2. Christ says in verse 10, are you a teacher? Verse 2, except God be with him. And then Christ says in verse 3, except a man be. Verse 4, how can a man be born? And then Christ answers, except a man be born. So he's trying to, he's kind of using a lot of very similar language to talk to him. He's not trying to go above his head and try to overthink Nicodemus, even though he could have, or give him a parable. He's saying, this is what you're saying, this is what I'm saying back. And then verse 4, Nicodemus asks, can he enter? And then Christ says he cannot enter. Verse 5. Verse 9, how can is asked. And then Christ says, verse 12, how shall? And then verse 9 is, how can these things be? And then Christ answers, knowest not these things. That's in the King James there. And so each one of those, he's using the same language back to try to explain his own question.
I got you.
He's kind of collaborating with him, trying to help him get his own answer. and that's I believe, a very masterful way that he's teaching. He's not trying to, go beneath him or go above him. He's just saying, this is your question. We're going to answer it with your own words, and kind of guide you that way. So it's really impressive.
Staying on his level, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
I
right.
got you.
And then, also, verse 11, about the plural there and the you, and I know that, most surely I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen. There's different things there. Some say he's dealing with Christ and God. Some say it's Christ and the Holy Spirit. Some say it's men. Some say it's a universal Christian consciousness. Some say that this we and you here is dealing with Christ and the prophets, and some others still say it's Christ and John the Baptist, about the plural and the we and everything. I think it's dealing personally with the omniscience of the Godhead, and that Jesus speaks on behalf of the Godhead. And so we speak what we know. And each member of the Godhead, in full equality, speaks the same thing as the other one. The Spirit speaks the same thing as Jesus spoke. God spoke the same thing that Jesus spoke. They all speak the same thing. So I think it's dealing with, no matter who you're talking to or what you're talking about, inside of all of Scripture, no matter who's speaking, everyone's going to tell you the same thing, what we've seen, and yet you do not receive our witness. I think it's dealing just with, throughout all the ages of the Old Testament, I think it's dealing obviously now with the discussion here of Jesus himself. He's just trying to explain it to him. I think it's more of that than anything personally, is that God, and then that's an overlying theme throughout the Gospel of John is, when Jesus speaks, God's already said it before, or, there's always that constant stream of information that's always been available, always been there. It's never, there's no novel idea coming out of Jesus' mouth here. It's all been very saturated throughout all of Scripture, So that's how I look at verse 11.
Yeah. So you're under the that the we is Jesus, the Godhead.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's why I was kind of threw off on it. I really didn't know. I can't exactly remember what guy in Woods says this. The light who got I can't remember his first name. I always remember that last name.
David.
That's not on here, man.
Light, Lipe.
Yeah.
Yeah, David Light. Okay.
Yeah, David Light.
Yeah.
He's on. He uses. He's talking about Jesus and the disciples. And he kind of says Jesus is mimicking the plural used by Nicodemus when he first approached Jesus in verse 2. But then he goes on, although the emphasis of the verse is on Jesus' own knowledge and testimony. So, and that, if it's Jesus' own knowledge and own testimony, that's going to include the Godhead there. So, that fits too, you know what I mean? But,
so he's saying his disciples, though, inside of that commentary you got there, that he's talking about him and his disciples.
Well, he does ask it. He does say this in a question. Was he identifying himself with the disciples? It's almost as he wants to say, that's what he's saying. But then
I see.
Honestly, I ain't trying to knock the fellow. I really like his commentary. Seems like he might be a little bit, he don't really know himself, and I think that's all right,
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I think it's, and that's the thing too about when you read certain translations, because like in the New King James, for example, the we there is capitalized, whereas that is not, and that implies deity.
Yes.
But that is I believe a translation preference. And because if you look at the Greek, obviously then you go into the uncials and men and all those kind of things. But there's no real capitalization of deity terms. That's all a newer thing.
They used to throw me off for the bad.
Yeah. So you have to take that for what it is. That's added in there to help with the translation, and I understand that. And obviously, I understand Brother Lipes' point of view as well. I think it makes sense. Because Nicodemus is coming with the idea of we know that you're a teacher from God, and that's given a lot of implications there, that there are some ones in the Sanhedrin perhaps and among the Jewish community that realize who Jesus is, and so he's speaking kind of on behalf of them to an extent. I totally get that. I mean, and it may be the same thing here with his disciples. It could be. I personally, I'm more inclined to believing it's more of the omniscience.
The deity? Yeah.
But just by the context, just for me, but obviously, I don't have all the answers either. So,
I try to tell people sometimes we don't need to quibble over things we just don't know, or you can, it's okay to have an opinion as long as you're not dogmatic about it.
Yeah.
But yeah. That's why I was with you. I think Diane Woods says deity too. I can't remember exactly. Anyway, we could sit here and talk.
Yeah, well,
we could talk about it for a while.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I do have another thing here that I found about Judaism. That's want to share, kind of bringing up to where they are as a people during this whole discussion. This is from, I think it's a Baptist, A.W. Pink. It says, so far we have seen a blinded priesthood, John 1, 21, 26, a joyless nation, John 2, verse 3, a desecrated temple, John 2, 16. Now we have a spiritually dead Sanhedrin. So that's so there's just they're completely just floundering. They're lost. They don't know where they're going. So that's pretty.
Man, that's good. I like that. I really like that.
Yeah. And then verse 12, because that was all verse 11 for me. If I told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? I think. And that's dealing with what you were mentioning a minute ago about baptism and worship, and it's physical, but it has a spiritual element as well, of course. And I think that he's just trying to explain to him, this is what's going on. Are you gonna grasp it? I'm trying to help you using. I think he's saying I'm going to use like earthly terms. And that's kind of where I was going with the discussion. He's using his own terms, to try to help him grasp the information he's trying to figure out himself.
It's kind of like Drew Leonard. I've been listening to his stuff on Daniel again, and why didn't one of his explanations of Daniel? I think it was Daniel. Talking about the kingdom coming and how he explains the kingdom to these Jews and like, well, people, why didn't he tell them? Well, he can't tell them about singing and praying and preaching and stuff like that because in their time they did not understand that. It's like somebody in the 1930s, if you try to tell them, or say the 1800s, a teenage boy grows up wanting to know, wanting that car, a horse and buggy. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't tell him about a Corvette or a car because all he knows is horse and buggy. So you're going to explain the most thing that you're going to explain it to them in a way that they understand it. They couldn't understand a car, Model T. To them, no, So I think that's what you're trying to say. What Jesus is doing here, he's really just talking to him on his level, where he's at, in a way that he can understand it.
Right.
He can't tell him. Basically, if you can't understand the simple stuff, if you can't understand this horse and buggy, you're not going to understand when I'm talking to you about a V8 engine, Corvette or something other, whatever size engine's in them.
Yeah,
I kind of think that's what you're getting at there.
Yeah, I like how you explain that. That's really good. Really good. Really good. Yeah.
Give credit to Drew for that one.
Okay, good job, Drew.
Yeah, I've used that a few times in explaining other things like why. Well, I mean, it's like he's talking on their level, and that's all right. That's all right to talk on people's level. Sometimes you need to be that way.
Yeah.
I think if you're trying to explain things to a teenager, there's a way that you can talk to them. If you're talking to sometimes you're talking to little children. There's ways, and I think sometimes when you talk to some adults, you need to talk to them like they're children. It just depends on where that person is.
Sure.
Really.
Sure. And I do think it's interesting that Jesus would do it in this way because I think it does show that Nicodemus is sincerely curious.
Yes.
Because, sometimes, Christ would do a parable and say, if you're spiritual, you can figure it out. If you're not, then you're just, and the Bible says that you are judging yourselves unworthy. Whereas here, he's not doing the typical, parable trying to make him figure it out himself. He's saying, I'm going to talk to you, kind of one by one. Let's go through it together. And so I think that shows Nicodemus was sincerely interested in who Jesus was.
Yeah, and that's how I talked about that show, The Chosen.
Yeah.
That's how they portrayed him. He was really. Out of all the Pharisees that you see during that show, when Nicodemus really starts hearing about Jesus and he's really it's piqued his interest, and he does a lot of investigating, and trying to figure it out. But they portray as Nicodemus really, he's curious. I mean. I think it's good that he was curious,
Sure.
he wanted to know, man. I mean, he'd been waiting. When you think about it, he's probably, I can't remember too many Pharisees that are in the Bible that really kind of, they portray as good besides just Nicodemus, really.
Yeah.
The rest of them all bad.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I've been reading, well, I'm always reading something. I was reading this thing the other day, and I thought it was really good. And there's a guy named Vincent, in his commentary on Luke, and some things I don't agree with, but he made a good thing I thought was really good, is that he said that Jesus was invited by the Pharisees, different people who are Pharisees, to go and eat at their house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On 3 different occasions. And yet, those were the ones that it would seem would really be, kind of his biggest critics. But yet, every time that Christ was given an invitation, he's going to go. And so by Jesus even doing that, he's showing us what it means to love your enemies.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, then in the book of Acts, it says that some of the Pharisees believed. Well, where did that come from? Because of the groundwork that Jesus did by never, obviously, several times he would say to them, woe unto you Pharisees, you hypocrites, and he didn't have any problem calling them out either. But it's interesting here, you kind of keep them in check, but it's interesting here that that some of them would eventually believe in Jesus later on. And so I think that speaks volumes of how Jesus interacted with these guys too. I think he was very fair with them, and they understood, and he, was very, just upfront. Yeah. In that show again, there's a couple times he goes and eats at some of the Pharisees' houses and eats lunch. He gets invited. So I think that's kind of neat that you bring that up. Yeah. Let's go to verse 13.
Yeah, you said something in my mind.
Oh.
My mind went somewhere, and I was trying to think, but anyway. So yeah, trying to think.
Well, I've been
Verse
there.
13.
Let's go.
Yeah, just a second. I got a lot more to say, especially when we get down to about Moses here.
Oh yeah, let's go ahead.
Verse 13, no one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven. So again, I got here, Christ is letting Nicodemus know that he's not just a mere man. I'm not just some mere man like a man sent by God as John the Baptist. I come down from heaven. I come from heaven. And heaven is still, and I'm still a part of heaven. Mm-hmm. And I'm still a witness to these heavenly things. That's me. I am him. And that Son of Man, that takes us, I think that's what is used in Daniel, if I do believe. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That can take you back to Daniel. And that way, these people will know that he's claiming deity here. Just with that phrase, the Son of Man, they would know he is claiming deity right there. Mm. Do you have anything on verse 13?
I mean, just what you've already said. I have one thing that says, it is to be noted that Christ did not say, no man hath entered heaven, but no man has ascended up to heaven.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Verse 14 and 15. I'm going to read them together. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And I'm going to stop right there. And because I have there's a good bit could be taught here or talked about here, just these two verses. And it comes right before probably one of the most well-known verses of the world, 3:16. Everybody knows that one. But I stopped at 15, and I really want to talk because, a lot of people don't know that story of Moses there, lifting up the serpent. I got it here. It's Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. Mm-hmm. And it says, then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people. And many of the people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he taketh away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and so it was. If a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. There's a lot really here. So here in the two verses, we see that the serpent was lifted up, and also Jesus is going to be lifted up, right? In verse 15, if those two phrases, you look at it like how math, if the serpent lifted up equals Jesus lifted up. In verse 15, what would you reckon believes in him should equal something to the story of the serpent, right?
Yeah.
So the idea, what I get away from it is, the idea is if these two things equal, all right, well, in verse 15, he's still talking about the same thing. He now he's trying, he's back to Jesus, back to here now, or not, it'd be forward. It ain't been lifted up yet. But, you have to believe in him. Well, believing in him should equal something in that story of Moses. And what I have down is that the believing in him is when these people got up from wherever they was, because sometimes you gotta realize this Israelite camp, it wasn't like 10 or 15 folks. It was
thousands.
I think thousands, if not, I think some, it may have been more. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, I know there's like, what, 2 or 3 million, some say 7 million.
Yeah,
All kind of numbers you can get.
You got to think of the number. Why? Why did the Egyptians, first put them in a bondage? I think it does give numbers. Like there was over like 2 million or 4 million. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of numbers thrown around. It was very considerable. We know it's very considerable.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Anyway, if it was 100, but anyways, it was a lot of folks. So when Moses spoke, they had sinned, and so that serpent, I would guess the serpent would be a representation of sin here. And when it bites you, you're going to die. Sin dies. It kills you. No different today. You'll die an eternal death. It kills your soul. But anyways, believing in him equals to them looking at that serpent, them getting up and doing something. Moses put this pole up with the serpent on it, and like we mentioned, this was a great multitude of people. It's not like they could just, peer from. I mean, they probably couldn't see it, some of them, and so some of them had to get up and go and look at this serpent. So the idea, what I'm trying to get to, believing is always active. And, something active, something's going on. They had to do something to believing in. They had, they just couldn't sit in their tent after getting bit by the snake, sit in the tent and say, yeah, I believe. I believe what the Lord said. I believe that serpent's there. I believe it's up there. And get cured. No, they had to get up. They had to go and actually look at that. They had to obey. I mean, believing is obeying, is what I'm getting at here. Do you have anything there?
Says, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. This event is recorded in Numbers 21, 5 and 6. After the Israelites were led from Egyptian bondage into the wilderness of Sinai, many of them began to murmur against Jehovah. When the people acknowledged their sin, God sent deliverance in the form of a serpent. Numbers 21, 8 and 9. We note the use of the connective even so in John 3:14. The incident of the serpent was, of course, typical of the death of Christ. It was a symbol or picture. The desired cure was not to be realized in simply believing that such could occur, but through both intellectual faith and obedience to the command to go and look on the image of the serpent. This faith required in us. Verse 14 this faith required in verse 15, is not absent of obedience to specific commands. They were rebellious in that they were doubting God's promises, disdaining God's provisions, and now they are disposing God's Son and prophet.
Yeah. And
Same thing as what you said.
Yeah. But I kind of find it odd, we can have a story like this or showing that they had to do something to be saved. It comes right after, and it's still in the same context of being born of water and of spirit. Because we have so many people today that try to say that you don't have to do nothing. You just need to simply believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
But that's not what contextually, that's not what this is teaching. Mm-hmm. He's not teaching you. He is giving you a clear example of where someone believing in the Son of Man being lifted up. He's showing you that they had to do something. They had to do something to show that they believed in him. It's more than that intellectual believing. It's more than something. They had to have a living faith. I put in my notes, one could say that God offered these children of Israel grace. He had grace. He gave them grace. Well, I mean, couldn't you say it? He gave them mercy, all right? Grace and mercy.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't deserve it. They're the ones that caused the murmuring, and they're the ones that done the sinning, right? No different today. We all sin. Well, he offered them grace. That grace was what?
You can be
You
healed.
got the you can be healed, but it's still connected with obedience
Right.
to receive God's grace. Anyway, I hope I haven't butchered that up too much. I didn't go by exactly how my notes had here. Yeah, I know.
It'd be okay.
But I mean, but the idea, what I want to get into, really talk about really is we need to understand what a biblical, what does it mean to have a biblical belief or a biblical faith before we get to John 3:16, because
Sure.
Anywhere in the Bible where you see that word believe or faith, stuff like that, there's something that's happened. They're doing something. Something's going on. There's something active. It's always active. So that's